Hello, friendly alumni. Welcome back to From Here Forward, your favorite UBC Podcast Network podcast. How's it going on the West Coast, Jeevan?
It's going well. We're in that sweet spot of Vancouver weather where it's just so nice outside, so I've been trying to make the most of it. How's the East Coast?
I love that for you. I am navigating the weird limbo of being a transplant in my home province. It's a little weird going to government offices and being like, hey, I'm a BC resident, trying to be an Ontario resident, even though I literally grew up here up until very recently. But speaking of East Coast, West Coast, our guest is from BC, but she's been working and living in the Big Apple, aka the city.
And that was very millennial of you.
I know, but I just don't like the Gen Z term for it. Work island. It makes sense, but it just doesn't have the zhuzh, you know what I mean?
Or, and hear me out, crazy idea, you could just call it New York City like the rest of us.
Ha 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 ha. Anyway, let us introduce our wonderful, amazing guest, why don't we?
Today's guest is Melanie Ash, who is currently the Deputy Chief of the Affirmative Litigation Division at the New York City Law Department.
And we learned a lot about her expertise in racial equity and the practice of law, and everything she learned in her career path since she graduated from UBC in '96, aka my birth year, aka to this year is my champagne year. We hope you enjoy.
My name is Melanie Ash. I am currently the Deputy Chief of the Affirmative Litigation Division at the New York City Law Department.
Great. And can you tell us a bit about your time studying law in Canada? And after graduating from UBC, what drew you to New York and why'd you stay?
Sure. Okay, so I was at UBC going back a lot of years right now. 1993 and 1996, graduated in 1996. Yeah, I had done my undergraduate degree in Ottawa. Although I'm from British Columbia originally, I had gone out there to do my first degree, because I was a page in the House of Commons. I don't know if you're familiar with that program, but you have to study in Ottawa. So I moved from BC out to Ottawa, and I was excited to come back to BC for law school. It was nice. I'd never lived that far away. I'd never even been that far away from BC. So I'm definitely a BC girl, although it wouldn't seem like it because I live in New York, but I'm a BC girl at heart. And so I was excited to come back. I really enjoyed that first year. Everyone says like law school, the first year of law school is, devastating. It's difficult. It's challenging. It was challenging, but I also really enjoyed it. It was very intellectually stimulating. And as I was saying this to someone the other day, I don't know if Law and Order started on TV when I was in law school, or if that's when I first discovered it. I think maybe it actually started. We'd have to go back and check the dates. But I remember after days of class, so I'd have my criminal law class and I'd go back to the dorms. I had a good friend who lived in the dorm, whatever the tall one is. This is my memory for this is not very good, but he lived in the dorm, right? The big tall one that was right behind the law school. And we'd go back there and watch like Law and Order, and they were actually they were covering the same topics that we were studying. So it was felt like it was really real. Like this is real stuff, and Hollywood is, I was excited. It just was invigorating. So yeah, I enjoyed my time. Obviously there were challenges, any number of things. For example, I think in my class, I was the only Black person. So in a class of 180 students, I think it was, that was challenging, and just being so much the only one. But I'm kind of used to that over the course of my years in academia and things like that. Law was sort of the right career for me. I have a lot of friends who law school was the introduction to the fact that law was not the career for them. They immediately knew that they were not enjoying it. But for me, I was like, yep, this is exactly where I'm meant to be. I was a student of history, and I enjoyed and studying the way in which law was used as a tool for social justice, in particular in the US up to that point. So, Brown versus Board of Education, kind of civil rights type cases. So that was one of the things that led me to law school. And in studying at UBC, they didn't offer some of the classes that I was hoping to take. And I kind of thought maybe I could be a professor. So I sort of was toying with the idea of being a professor, and I needed to do a graduate degree. So I ended up in New York because I came to Columbia University to do a graduate degree in law. And it was supposed to be 2 years, and I was going to be heading back to Canada after my 2-year program. I fell in love with this city. I love New York City. And I knew after the first year, like summer of the first year, I knew that I wasn't going to be ready to leave after 2 years. The program that I was in, part of it was that I was teaching. It was a sort of I was called an associate in law. And what that meant was that I was, at the same time that I was studying, I was also teaching research and writing to the first year students who were doing the JD program at Columbia. And I liked teaching. I liked interacting with the students, but I also felt like it was a little bit isolated. You know, you're living on at a university and you're not engaged with sort of the real world of legal practice. And I'd only done at this point, I think 6 months total of practice. I had gone to clerk. I had then done my articling in BC. And I had done about 6 months of practice while I waited to go to the graduate program. And I felt like I hadn't really given practice a really fair shot, and that I was second guessing my intentions of going to teach. I thought, no, I don't know if I really want to teach. I actually think I might want to practice. The thing about practice I liked was the problem solving for your clients and sort of being able to, I guess, impact things that, the sort of social justice mission that I had in mind when I first went to law school. It felt to me like maybe that would be, I could actually only achieve that, or maybe better achieve that, if I was practicing. So I just flipped my switch, and I went back to looking for a job, and I wanted to stay in New York for at least a little while longer. I didn't really know how long, but so I looked for a job in New York, and I wrote the New York bar, and yeah, the rest is history.
How did UBC and your time, as a student, how did that affect your work and just your general interests and kind of the skill sets that you have now, if at all?
Well, I had a couple of professors who I just really found to be incredibly, I guess, captivating. I really enjoyed everything I learned from them. They really spoke to me in terms of what they taught and the content and the way in which they were thinking about some of the same social justice issues that I was thinking about, maybe from a different perspective. I felt like I learned those tools of critical thinking in part through those professors, and that was sort of something I wanted to continue to explore in the US. So, I studied constitutional law with Professor Joel Bakken, who you may have heard of, but he's, a really big leading light in the area, and has written and done documentaries, and like he's really heralded. But he's an excellent professor, and he got me excited about what I could do with constitutional law, and applying it to some of the sort of problems, progressive causes, and things like that. I studied property law with a professor named Marley Klein, who was kind of a mentor to me. Again, she sort of came at it with a social justice and a poverty and a Aboriginal law perspective. I mean, she just really brought a lot of interesting ideas, a feminist perspective. I think those two professors, as well as at the time, there was a professor named Nithya Iyer, who she's actually now Supreme Court Justice in British Columbia. But she was a professor at UBC when I was there. Similarly, she had done some of the innovative thinking around race and the law in Canada at the time. There was not a lot of thinking, not a lot of writing about those issues. So Nithya and Marley had both done some writing in that space, and those were issues that I was interested in. And how I ended up choosing Columbia was in part because at the time, and I think probably maybe even still now, it had the most highly regarded faculty on critical race theory, which was that I wanted to study. So I ended up applying to a couple of schools and deciding that Columbia was the right one because of the faculty they had focused on critical race theory, as well as the teaching program that I was going to be able to do.
Can you tell us about being seconded to work as general counsel to the New York City Racial Justice Commission? What were your biggest challenges in that capacity, and what were your biggest accomplishments?
It was 2021. It was probably March or April. I was asked to, would I consider taking on this role as general counsel of this newly created or was actually in the process of being created, Racial Justice Commission. First of its kind in the nation. So I think that gives you a hint as to one of the challenges was just it never been done before. There had been plenty of charter revision commissions, which is basically a body that has a legislative power in New York and in many other places as well. But in New York City, the New York City Charter is kind of like the city's constitution. And there's a few ways that it can be revised. One of those is through a charter revision commission, and where a group of people, and the commission itself operates independent from city government, but has the power to propose changes to the charter, which are then put back to the voters of the city through a referendum. And if they're adopted, the changes go into effect. So it's a way to change the city's constitution. And what was unique about this particular Charter Revision Commission was that it was given a mandate to focus on racial justice. This was in the sort of aftermath of George Floyd's murder and the sort of reckoning that was going on in New York and around this country and really around the world, I think, around racial justice issues. So the mayor wanted to struck this commission with the goal of trying to explore and uproot racial injustice in city government, because the charter, among other things that it has in it, it sets the structure for New York City's government. So it was a way to further that conversation, or to at least apply a lens of racial justice to New York City's government and say, are we operating in a way that furthers or undermines racial justice? And how do we switch from one to the other, or from undermining potentially to furthering racial justice? So a body of people was struck to form the Racial Justice Commission. It was a moment that was very challenging in the country's history, I think, with the George Floyd murder and sort of the realization or the acknowledgement of a lot of fundamental problems that continued to exist. I think the other challenge was really, in some ways, logistical, and that was we were doing this in the middle of a pandemic. There are a lot of rules about how government operates, how these charter commissions operate, and they are subject to open meetings law, which means they have to meet in person and they have to meet in a way that's open to the public to attend and watch. And doing that in the middle of a pandemic when nobody is allowed to be, when you're supposed to be socially distant and you're not supposed to be in the same room with each other. And we also, obviously we wanted, and one of the things that charter revision commissions really focus on is letting the people have a voice. So the practice is usually to go out into the community and hold hearings and have meetings, and trying to do that in a way that respected everybody's concerns about interacting in person. So the logistical stuff was extraordinarily challenging, trying to figure out how would we do public meetings and hearings when people would want to come, and would they want to come, and how would we get their input if we couldn't get people to come because of COVID. Did the law even allow us to hold meetings in public because of that? I mean, there were just a lot of really challenging issues around that piece. But then the topic itself is challenging, and at the same time that I think New York City was leading the way, let's say in this space, because it was the first of its kind in the country, nobody had done this type of a commission before. There was also a backlash kind of going in some parts of the country where there were people objecting to and kind of trying to roll back, if I could say it that way, some of the good gains that had been made in this around racial justice. There was a moment when everybody was really kind of engaged in saying, yes, we want to do better. And then there was sort of a backlash to it from people saying, well, I don't know, like banning books and trying to outlaw critical race theory. I mean, it was, so these things were happening at the same time. And as a commission, we knew that we felt confident because this was a new, I was staff, I was a general counsel, but there were commissioners who were very active, experienced community activists and academics and lawyers and people with a religious background. We also knew we had to put this to voters, and so you really want to make sure you're capturing what voters want and portraying that to them and giving that to them on the ballot. I think in Minneapolis, which is where George Floyd actually was murdered, they had attempted to make some changes to their government structure that had to go in front of voters, and it was rejected by the voters. So we were cognizant of the fact that, a group of 13 people or 11 people on their own without community input would not necessarily be reflecting what the community wants, and it could be rejected by the voters. The other piece that I didn't really speak to, but is the general counsel role was uniquely important in a commission because you're trying to rewrite laws. So you have to first of all make sure what you're changing, you actually have the power to change it, that it's within the jurisdiction of that government. So the question here would be, is this something a local government even has the power to do? How would we enact it? What would the legislation that enacts it have to look like? So it was like drafting legislation. It was researching and making sure that these things would be constitutional. There was a lot of legal aspects to the work that were challenging for me as head lawyer. So when the commission would say, we would like to do X or we'd like to do Y, the question becomes, can we legally do that? How would it be accomplished? What would it look like? What would the language have to look like? Where would you put the commas in the legislation? It was like that level of, so it was big picture. But it was really, the team was amazing. The commissioners themselves were amazing. The actual staff that were working with me in all the different roles, they were all excellent. And so it was actually a really exhilarating and experience, but exhausting. Then we took everything to the voters in a ballot questions. So that was another piece that we then had to do an election campaign. But the way in which charter revision works is you can't advocate for your proposals. You have to just educate the public and let them make up their own mind. So as the lawyer, I had to make sure that everything we were doing did not amount to advocacy for the next 8 months of that election, run up to the election. And that included all of the ad campaigns and posters and every, speech we gave, every testimony to city council.
So you touched upon the challenges, but is there anything that you were like really happy that you were able to do, like certain accomplishments or even just skill sets or just moments for yourself from that experience?
The work felt really big. The accomplishment felt really big. What we managed to, what the voters, there was something like almost 70% yes vote on all the proposals. So that's a pretty big mandate. That was a pretty big success. I don't know if it's felt gratitude that we had been able to translate what people told us in the when they came to the body and made their submissions and suggested we do things, that they felt we had articulated changes that reflected what they wanted. That felt really gratifying. The changes themselves, I think, have the potential to be really transformative. So we were excited about that. One of the changes was to add a preamble to the charter, which reflected sort of the values that the city wanted their government to embrace and to act upon, the values of racial equity and acknowledging past harms, reconciling, and sort of bringing people together in pursuit of a common future. Some of the Asian community that came to appear before the commission, they often articulated a sense of not being seen as really a part of of the city. Sort of, there's oftentimes there's a racial dichotomy that's people are seen, things are seen in black and white, meaning black citizens and white citizens, or black people and white people, and not, and the sort of nuances of the way in which racialized people exist in the country aren't always articulated. And I think they said, we're often seen as being foreigners, and we're here, we've been in the city as long as so many people. I mean, we've been here for hundreds, 100+ years or whatever. And I think the way in which the preamble was sort of, which we treated as a sort of a vision statement, reflected their history and their value to the city and to the development of the city and how everybody had contributed. I think for some people that was really emotional to them. They've actually seeing their contributions to New York City written into the Constitution. These people have contributed in this way. There was a land acknowledgement in relation to the Lenape people who are the original inhabitants of New York City and the surrounding areas, which had never been done before. And writing that into the Constitution felt like important acknowledgments of the value of all this history and the struggle that led the city to be the way it is. And so I think that felt really good, and that it's a vision statement, but it's also a guiding statement for city government. So in contrast to some of the backlash you see in other cities, it was a pretty bold statement and a pretty clear statement that this New York City does not ascribe to that, and that New York City wants to be a racially diverse, a rich, city full of that values the history and that acknowledges and celebrates people, of all races, orientations, religions.
You talked about sort of those early days in law school and being inspired by these like landmark cases when it comes to like racial equity, and having those things reflected in the law. Through your work, in what ways have you seen the limitations of the law when it comes to the rights and protections of marginalized communities, and how does that drive your work going forward, whether that's through the commission or any additional work that you've done?
I think right now we're seeing that the Supreme Court has ruled on a few things in a ways that have really set back some of the principles that I articulated. For example, overturning affirmative action, race conscious, race based admissions policies in higher education. So that sort of those kinds of decisions really show how difficult it can be to achieve some of these goals in light of the way in which the law is moving. I think it means the end result is that sometimes you have to be more creative in how you approach the issues. So you have to come up with new strategies, legal strategies around that fit within the current structure of the law. There's a real difference, and as a Canadian who's studied in Canada, I really see the really significant differeces. And affirmative action is just one really massive example, but also like a Roe versus Wade, abortion rights, reproductive freedoms type case in the U.S. versus the way the law is in Canada. So I think as someone who's familiar with both of those, I have a really interesting lens that I can see how the two countries have diverged in their paths. Sometimes it can be disheartening trying to use the law for social justice and seeing decisions come down that really disrupt all. And you have to really just go back to the well and start over again in terms of thinking about how do we think about these issues? How can we, use the law as it currently exists and pursue these issues? It's challenging. It means people have to go back to the drawing board a little bit and think about what does the law say and how do we fit our arguments with that, or to either expand the law or to reframe the arguments so that they still are able to achieve the goal that you want to achieve.
So you mentioned that you love New York. Do you have any plans of returning to Canada and potentially expanding your work in racial justice here, or not?
I still maintain it that, the right opportunity, anything is possible. It's interesting because about 10 or 12 years ago, I came back to Canada and I worked in Canada for 4 years, and then I moved back to New York. And one of the reasons was that I struggled to find the opportunities and the ways to do the type of work that had been really engaged in here in Canada. Like it just didn't exist in the way that I was familiar with it. And so I do sort of think about, are there ways to expand that type of work? I work for a city. I work in city government. There's something, the United States is way more litigious than Canada. And I think that in part that's reflected in, that's the reason or explains the size of the office that I work in, with a tremendously large staff of lawyers working on these issues. It just doesn't exist like that in Canada. So I struggle to try to find the right place to do the work that I was interested in. If that should develop or if I should find a way, I definitely am open to it. I do still consider myself to be both New York and Vancouver to be home. I'm never going to say never, and I don't write it off. And I definitely do think about opportunities and talk to friends and people who are living and working there about, what's going on and whether maybe now I should be turning back to teaching. And after I've had all that experience, and maybe I could teach in Canada. I mean, I definitely think about all those things. No concrete plans right now, but I definitely sort of have it as a little in the back of my mind, keeping an eye open for the right possible opportunity.
For young people who are interested in racial justice and equity work, what advice would you have to encourage them to pursue this kind of work, but also any words of wisdom when it comes to the taxing nature of this work?
I would really make a plea for, bringing social justice principles into your advocacy work and into the work that you do. I mean, I work in the law, so that's the area that I really speak about, that I know the most. But I do think there's a lot of need in Canada to bring those social justice advocacy principles into your legal practice. And I think, and here it often happens in the way of pro bono work. People do, law firms do work for free. I think there's a lot of opportunities and I would encourage people to look for opportunities to do social justice work, legal work. I spoke at University of Calgary this past year, and I said, it doesn't have to be the first thing you do. You could find ways to bring it into to your work, whether it's in the arguments that you make, in doing pro bono work and seeking out jobs working for nonprofit organizations or working in government. I think there's a lot of spaces, but I do think it's important to bring those voices into the development of the law that may not always have had a place. Obviously, it can be disheartening at times. It can be exhausting. So I think the biggest thing that I think a lot of people are realizing is the need for self-care, the need for to kind of take care of yourself and to acknowledge that the cost that some of the work that you do might take on your own spirit and on your own kind of emotions and mental health while you're struggling and while you're engaged in the struggle, to also take time for joy and to find ways to express that and to find ways to find community in the work that you're doing. Because I think when you're in that work together, there's a community, there's a sense of community that you can have with other people doing social justice work that is really rewarding and fulfilling and kind of soul enriching, I guess. I think if you're committed to social justice, then it's a great field to be in, and there's a lot of work to be done, and there's a lot of brilliant people doing it, and to try to find your space where you can, bring your vision to the practice of law.
Similar thread, having experienced many things, lots of accomplishments, and kind of everything you now know, what would you kind of tell your younger self who might have been a bit more, what's the word, enthusiastic about life and not as discouraged at times? What would you kind of offer?
I guess what I would say, my younger self was so eager to get right into that practice that I went straight through. I didn't take any time off. I just went from undergrad straight into law school, straight into practice, or straight into the next, I guess, step, which was a graduate degree, and then straight into practice. I would have perhaps taken a little more time and tried to find opportunities to maybe do a travel year that people like to do. I never did anything like that. So I think if there's one thing, it's that the work is always going to be waiting for you. And so I would encourage people to really, while you have that freedom, to kind of use that freedom and explore a little bit. I think it obviously, and aside from just taking a break and it also, I think perspectives from other people around the world are valuable. You can be living in your little silo and all you see and know is what you see and know in your daily life. And I do think there's a real value to expanding your horizons in terms of seeing how other people live, understanding other legal issues, puts things in perspective sometimes to see what other people are going through and how their lives are different than yours, and how you may have. I mean, I think hopefully lawyers recognize they have a tremendous amount of privilege, even lawyers of all types, whether they're people who in a societal way, maybe they belong to a group that has been disenfranchised or disadvantaged in some way. But when you have the capacity and the ability to go to law school and to work as a lawyer, there's a lot of privilege that you do have. I think people will see that more once they've kind of expanded their horizons and seen what else is going on and what other people are dealing with. I do feel like young people bring an energy and that's a good thing. As people, let's say my generation, Gen X or whatever, are kind of getting beaten down, I think you need that influx of new energy from the next generation, because they're the ones who are going to push the rock forward that next little bit. I think you need, as different groups tire and they've done their work, that's the whole point. And at least in the civil rights movement, it's really around standing on the shoulders of the ones who went before you. So the people who were the founders or the original leaders in this space, at some point they either tire or they age out of it. They can't continue to do the work. They're retired. Or they pass on. And the goal would be that you've left it better than you came to it. So that every next generation would be starting at a better place and could carry it farther forward. So, I mean, I don't think I would try to tell myself not to have that exuberance and passion and kind of naivete or whatever. I think you need that, because if everybody's coming in cynical, then really there's no hope for it. You have to have people coming in, and I'm a firm believer that at some point, you need to step back and let the next generation lead. You can't, otherwise, you're not going to get as far as you could, because they're coming into it not having necessarily seen the worst parts, and they're coming in, but they can still see the vast need for improvement in the current situation. And whereas when you came into it when it was so much worse, you might think we've already accomplished it, and what are you talking about? We need to do more. But I think when someone new comes in, not having ever lived with the old way, that might have been really particularly harmful and whatever, however you want to describe it, they come in rightfully looking to push the envelope even further. And so you probably get further than if you just have someone who has lived through all of it and sort of, let's be grateful for how far we've come. They're coming and saying, what are you talking about? We haven't come that far. Like, what are you talking about? This is not great. This is not acceptable. And they push it to the next level. So I think that's a good thing. So I would encourage you to come in with all your exuberance and naivete and obviously learn from the past, listen to, I guess, the elders, if you want to say it that way. I don't like to call myself that, but yeah, listen to where people have been and make and benefit from their experience, but also don't let it limit your vision for what could be in the future.
Great, amazing. Did you have anything that you wanted to add that we didn't ask you about?
I mean, I guess I would just, one thing I would say that I think is you can see the transformations that have been happening and celebrate them, but yet not be satisfied. I mentioned I was the only Black student in my year at UBC. That was challenging for many reasons, but I think it's a testament to how far we've come that the current UBC law school, they have something like, I don't know, I want to say 15, 20, 25 Black students a year. I mean, they really they've taken up that challenge. There's been, and partly because there's been scholarships that have been developed by people who were graduated around my age or even before, kind of acknowledging the need to diversify the legal profession. It's a seat of so much power, and it wields so much power in the world. Whether you look at the people who sit in Parliament, and usually like 2/3 to 3/4 of them are lawyers. I mean, it's a space where a lot of societal rules are developed by those people, and diversifying them is important. It's not, one group should not hold all the power. And so I think I say that it inspires me to see the change that's happened within the legal profession from that perspective. Obviously, there's still a tremendous amount of work because as you get up in the years of practice, the numbers of women, the numbers of people of color are dismal. A lot of times, the number of women partners, number of people of color who are partners in firms is really low. So there's a ton of work to be done. But when I was one of two, I I wish I could remember this. Maybe you'll be able to put a voiceover afterwards. There were actually this many students. I was one of, I guess, 180, or was it 200 or something like that, 28, 220, 250, something like that in my year. And now the number is multiplied exponentially because there's been a real intentional commitment to diversify the profession. And so UBC has set up, admissions streams to encourage Black and Indigenous students. And I think you're seeing the benefit of that. So I guess I would just, even though I'm cynical and now been working at it for so long time, I would also still say I'm hopeful because I've seen that change. And in only 20 some years, with intentional commitment to diversify, there's been a dramatic improvement in the number, and it makes a real difference, because if you don't see yourself reflected in the profession, then you don't think there's a place for you there. You don't think it's for you. If you don't know someone who's a lawyer in your family or a family friend, you might think it's not for me, I can't do it. But I think when you see 25, 30, 50, 60 Black students, that's diversifying the profession. That means that no one of those students has to kind of live it alone and kind of struggle with the burdens of being one of, the only one, the first of this one, the first of that, the first in that, in this class, the first in that class. And that matters because I think it's hard. It's a lonely job. It's lonely to be the first and the only, and to always be it in every space that you go into is really, really challenging. I much prefer seeing people be able to form community and support each other through the process, which is what they are doing at law schools these days. And so, yeah, that's a huge improvement. And so I would just kind of give kudos to UBC for making those commitments, because I think it was done very intentionally and with a lot of, encouragement and demands and, advocacy from Black students themselves and Black lawyers. But however it was accomplished, it's being accomplished. And so for me, that's something that I would like to commend and encourage, that, let's not stop now. Let's keep doing that, because I think just one or two classes of one student will change everything immediately. So there needs to be a continued kind of commitment to that diversification, and yeah, so I would encourage it to continue.
Great. I think that's the perfect note to leave it on. Thank you so much, Melanie, for sharing your work and your thoughts. It's been so great hearing from you. I think I speak from myself and Carol and the whole team. So thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I took so much from that conversation with Melanie. I mean, as journalists, we both know how much work there is to be done when it comes to legal reform and racial equity, both in the US and Canada. It's a bleak landscape for sure, but hearing Melanie's journey advocating for change was really nice to hear. What do you think, Carol?
Big retweet on that. A big takeaway for me was taking care of yourself in your activism. You know, I feel like talking about activism burnout and fatigue are pretty recent things nowadays, and it was really refreshing to hear from a professional talk about her experiences and the advice that she gave.
I also appreciated her comments about how essential the energy of young people is as her career goes on. I mean, I imagine you felt a similar way about me since I joined the team. Right, Carol?
If you're fishing for a compliment, you will be waiting in your grave, because my love language is not words of affirmation, but nice try.
Well, a girl can dream.
Dream big, my Gen Z youth. Dream big. Thanks everyone for listening. Make sure you catch our next episode by subscribing or following our show on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're feeling your feels, please drop us a review. You can follow me on Twitter at Carol Eugene Park.
And me at Jeevan K. Sangha. From Here Forward is an alumni UBC podcast produced by Podium Podcast Company.